How to run Ubuntu service on Windows at startup. I want to launch an SSH server on Linux subsystem, bash on Ubuntu on Windows, at Windows startup. The problem is that all Linux processes are terminated when bash window is closed. Is there a way to make Linux process run permanently in background without bash window?
Found a tutorial for that by a Searing. This was originally discussed and sorted out by GitHub users mjaki, FPQC, Chris, Theralkant, Minnie, and a Searing, myself, here. This URL. Note that running SSHD has security implications. Until WSL's security model has had longer to bake, you should assume that anyone who can SSH into your Windows box has permission to perform any command as the Windows user running SSHD, regardless of Linux level permissions. Permissions are probably more restrictive than that in practice, but WSL's initial security model is not intended to be very sophisticated. Attempting to aggregate the instructions from GitHub. Generate SSH host keys by running sudo dpkg reconfigure OpenServer in a bash shell. Run sudo nano /etc /ssh/sshd_config. Edit the use privilege separation yes, line to read, use privilege separation no. This is necessary because use privilege separation uses the CRUT syscall, which WSL doesn't currently support. While still editing /etc /ssh/sshd_config, you may choose to change password authentication no to password authentication yes. Otherwise you will have to set up SSH keys. Save /etc /ssh/sshd_config and exit. Run sudo visudo to edit the sudoers file. Add the line replacing $user with your Linux username. Save and exit. If visudo complains that your changes are invalid, fix them until it reports that they are valid, otherwise you can break sudo on your system. On the Windows side, edit the Windows firewall, and any third-party firewalls that you might be running, to allow incoming traffic on port 22. Because this isn't a super secure setup, I recommend only allowing incoming traffic from home, private, and domain networks, not from the public internet. Create a text file, autostarch.vbs, in Windows containing the following. Double-click on the script. It should start SSHD. You should be able to SSH into your Windows machine. Open Windows's task scheduler. Add a task that runs autostarch.vbs on system boot. Use script.exe as the command to run and the VBS script location as the parameter. And that's it, your Windows computer should be running a Linux OpenServer.
Create a file named wsl_setup.bat, and add content as follow. Add wsl_setup.bat file to Windows Startup folder Windows 10 change startup apps. Restart and log in your Windows account. Yes, you need to log in.
I've needed to do the same thing. Here's how to boot the Ubuntu Linux subsystem with all of cron's services upon the Windows boot and AMP. Provide a means to reboot the Linux subsystem. I'm successfully hosting the Ubuntu server, Minnie and AMP, Myriad database on our server. Install Linux subsystem. Open PowerShell as administrator. Paste. Install Ubuntu from Windows Store. Remove sudo password prompt, required. Open Bash, Linux subsystem installs this. Paste. Enable SSH password login, optional. Open Bash. Paste. Windows Autologon on start, required if you have a password or RDP-in. Open NetBLUS. Untick users must enter a username and password. Open Regedit as administrator. Browse to. Create a new string default password and write the user's password as value. Run bash/cron loop on start. Create a file called linux.bat in shell column startup. Paste. Add apps/services to startup on cron. Open bash. Sudo cron tab e. Select nano, or any editor you know how to save in. Append startup apps such as Ubuntu Server, Minnie, MySQL, PHP. Save and exit, ctrlx, then press Y and enter. Reboot the Linux subsystem without rebooting Windows. Open Bash or SSH in. This will close the current instance and create a new one applying cron. Extra, install PHP 7.1, not quite as straightforward. Run the commands below for a pretty standard setup. Run the command below for an OwnCloud setup. Extra, install Minnie's web server. Run the commands below for a base setup with PHP 7.1. Extra, install Myriad's MySQL database. Run the commands below for a MySQL database server. When prompted, set a root database user password.
Akpoma and Akhintron answers are great. I would like to extend description of last point how to add SSH task in Windows Task Scheduler, as it requires switching some options. Run Task Scheduler. On the left list select Task Scheduler, Local, then go to Action menu and create task. General tab. Name, SSH. Select Run whether user is logged on or not. Triggers tab. New. Begin the task at startup. Actions tab. New. Program/script. C:\/Windows\system32\bash.x. Add arguments. Optional. C sudo/user/spin/service ssh start. Conditions. Unselect start the task only if the computer is on AC power. Settings. Unselect stop the task if it runs longer than. It is use direct bash invocation. There is no need to wrap it in VBS or PowerShell scripts. I use service command for reasons that at Hintron explained. Additionally, direct SSHD invocation gives error. Missing privilege separation directory /var/run/sshd. In such case, it should be added this entry by sudo vishdo command. Also notice that here all users, first column, can start or stop SSHD. If you are only one user of this Windows machine, then it should be fine.
If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing.